Hey guys, so I just wanted to showcase a really fun build you can do using the new Acceleration Shrine belt, and that's a Jiquani's Potential Spark build. So Jiquani's Potential builds used to exist in the past too, with using Mage Blood and Coruscating Elixir to get around the blood magic downside while letting you be low life to grab Pain Attunement for extra more damage. And what Jiquani's Potential does is it gives you a ton of flat spell lightning damage or instacking, and we're leveraging that with the Inquisitor Ascendancy to stack Strength and Intelligence to get crit chance as well. Now, this naturally means that we lose a lot of suffix slots on our gear, which means res, it becomes a lot harder to cap, and we're solving that by using 2 helical rings, both with a 16% all elemental res fracture, as well as a large cluster with 4% all elemental resistances, and a Light of the Meaning with chaos res paired with the Unnatural Instinct to get a lot of chaos res. So as you can see, we are capped in all of our resistances in this way, and that lets us dedicate the rest of our suffixes to strength, int, and cast speed. So one of the biggest downsides of Jiquani's Potential in the past used to be that it's very hard to scale cast speed and projectile speed due to the fact that you don't have access to using something like 2 profane wands to get 46% cast speed and prod speed on both. So this meant that if you wanted to get a decent amount of cast speed, you were forced to use cast speed on the suffix of the 12 passive clusters like this. You would use 3 of these just to get to like something like 7 casts per second. And cast speed matters because Spark has a hit cap per cast on the enemy target. What this means is that the same cast of the Spark can only hit one target once every 0.66 seconds, but subsequent casts can bypass that limit to have their own limit and they can overlap. So getting more casts per second means you get more hits in per second, which is, I guess, obvious, but yes. But yeah, so Acceleration Shrine is pretty efficient in a Jiquani build due to that reason, since it gives us a ton of prod speed, something like 140% if you have the goal, as well as 90% action speed, which is a more multiplier to your cast speed. This naturally means that you don't have to invest as much cast speed to get the same or more amount of cast speed as you would in the past. So that naturally opens you up to more options for suffixes on the large clusters, such as all attributes. So Jiquani's Potential does force you to use the Blood Magic Keystone, which removes all your mana, makes your auras reserve life, gives you more life, and skill costs life instead of mana. So you can see one cast of Spark costs 139 life for me, and I can cast about, I think, 10-11 times per second on this build currently. So you might be wondering, how am I getting around this absurd amount of life cost? And that is through the Eternal Youth Keystone. So what Eternal Youth does is it makes our energy shield recharge instead apply to life, and this ends up being about 1200 life recharge per second, so that can easily out-sustain our life cost. And you might be wondering, if you have this little life, then how are you getting around chaos damage? So before this belt, you would use a Mage Blood with a Coruscating Elixir to make all of your chaos damage apply to your energy shield before your life instead. And that let you pretty much survive chaos damage without having to worry about your life as long as your energy shield is up. But since we are using the Acceleration belt, that means we can't use the Coruscating Elixir since it is a ruby flask with the duration. So how do we get around the downside of chaos damage? What we can do is grab this Uber Jewel. So this only drops from the Uber Exarch and Uber Eater. It is a Templar node that is not on any of the 3 ascendancies, and that is Searing Purity. And what Searing Purity does is it lets you shift 90% of your chaos damage to fire and elemental damage. And this applies to hits as well as damage over time, so poisons and desecrated ground aren't really a problem either. The remaining 10% does still apply to your life, which will turn off your recharge from time to time, and that's why we are using 4 life flasks with instant recovery on low life. You don't really have to do this, but I do recommend still having one for like emergency situations, since your recharge doesn't really turn off that much. And even when it is off, usually there are monsters on the screen, which means you can leech life from them. And since Spark hits a lot of times, that means instant leech is a very good addition. And you might be wondering, you're a spell elemental build, how are you getting life leech? So there are a few places you can get it. You can get it on a large cluster, but of course, since we are a stat stacker, we don't prefer that option due to the fact that it eats up one of a suffix slot. And one other place you can get it is on the Watcher's Eye for Vitality. This is generic damage leeches life while affected by Vitality. It's a very good option, very efficient option, I should say. There is also one more area where you can get it, which is on the imbued slot. So usually using a support for life leech support, if I can find it here, is a pretty bad option due to the fact that even at max level, this doesn't give any damage increase, but even at level 1, it's a pretty sizable damage leeches life. So if you put it at if you get it as an imbued gem, it's still very effective while not really taking up too much of your damage potential. So it's a very good budget option when you can't afford the Watcher's Eye. And for a budget Watcher's Eye, I would probably just get the Arcane Surge while you're affected by Zealotry mod, since Arcane Surge is a very strong support gem as well as effect. It gives you 20% increased cast speed and 35% more spell damage. There's not really any other support gem for Spark that gives you this much damage. You can get like a level 4 Pierce support, which solves both of your Pierce and gives you 20% more damage. But early on, you can opt for a Eyes of the Great Wolf instead, that has all attributes and Pierce 4 targets. And later on, you can opt for a Imbued instead to get +2 Pierce, and that is once you have the Watcher's Eye. So gearing wise, it's pretty simple. You just get strength in all elemental resistances and cast speed on as many pieces of your gear as you can. And you might have noticed that my goal is using a Shaper Crusader influence, and that is because of the Bound by Destiny gem here that gives you 15% increased intelligence if 2 Crusader items are equipped, and 1 to 1.5% spell crit if 4 Shaper items are equipped. The second line is pretty important for later swaps, but right now I'm not really using it due to the fact that I'm already crit capped with the socketed gems have 3.5% flat crit. Later on, you abandon this to get the other essence mod for socketed gems have 16% more cast speed. And since more cast speed is multiplicative with both action speed and increased cast speed, it is a very sizable damage increase later on. But if you want to swap to that, you of course need to activate the 4 Shaper items, which for me, that would be the Simplex, the Gull, the Shaper Elder Gloves, and later on a recrafted helical ring with Shaper. And of course, since we are using the belt, we get a second ring slot for free with the Nameless King Ascendancy, and of course, an added bonus of unaffected by poison, which means the only chaos dot we really have to worry about is Desecrated Ground, which you can block on your map if you really want to. But yeah, let's go over the budget setup. For the budget setup, I'd say the only thing you really care about on your Jiquani's potential is the flat damage, because the -1 level to all spell skill gems only really affects your auras and your minions, which you don't really care that much about. The flat damage roll is the thing that matters the most for your damage. The percent int doesn't really matter because we get so much percent attributes already, and the reduced max life does kind of matter, but not really, because we get a lot of our chaos max hit solved anyways through the Searing Purity. So early on, I would advise you, if you can, to get a goal with Shaper Crusader. If you can't, just the Crusader is fine. Some people might be making like a Crusader Redeemer, and you can maybe buy one of those up. But if you can't manage either of those, then you might need to opt for just getting Crusader on like one of your rings, like anywhere you can really fit it, really, since 2 Crusader is a very big damage increase for your Bound by Destiny. For your body armor, you just want anything with a bunch of energy shield. If you can fit it in, then you want to get a T1 intelligence. Like currently I'm using T2 intelligence because I'm too lazy to recraft this. But yeah, for your gloves, it doesn't really matter what level these supports are. Like you can get level 16 faster projectiles, faster casting, and crit strike multi. Like yes, it does matter to get a min-maxed version of this, but the min-max version with like level 25 and all that is not as much of a damage increase as you think. So just getting like one of these like bailed copies that crafters sell for pretty cheap. Like if they hit something like this, they'll just sell it, move on to a different base. So these end up being very numerous on the market for fairly cheap. So you can just grab one of those. For the boots, early on, I would suggest to use an Onslaught Shock boots with Crusader Redeemer due to the fact that we don't really need Tailwind on this build. So since we already have a lot of action speed, we want a lot of movement speed to kind of let you be pretty speedy even if we can't use a Quicksilver Flask. So that's why I say just go for Elevated Redeemer for Onslaught and get the Shock Avoidance from Crusader so that you can pair that with a, let's say, I forgot to put it here, but Abyss Jewel with Shock Avoid. You can get one of these for 50% Shock Avoid. Doesn't really matter what the other rolls are. You can get more life on this, energy shield, flat energy shield. You can get resistances if you really need it. But yeah, you want one of these, and then the Warlock boots with the Shock Avoid to reach 100% Shock Avoidance, paired with the Storm Shroud to get all elemental ailment avoidance. For the Corrupted Blood, you can kind of just replace this mastery with just a random CB jewel, honestly. Like Emperor's Wit, Emperor's Mastery, these are pretty optional pieces for later on when you want to min-max a bit further to get more intelligence. So you can even get CB on your Shock Avoid jewel. But yeah, early on you're using the Eyes of the Great Wolf with Pierce and Attributes. The attribute roll on the implicit can roll fairly high, but you don't have to get a max rolled attribute. It's still very effective at 24%. 32% is just nicer since you don't have to get as much dexterity for your to enable your Grace Gem. But yeah, I talked about our helicals. You pretty much want to go for one of these. This league, helicals are fairly cheap, so fracturing one of these yourself should be fairly easy. And you can fracture any one of these mods pretty much, but the one thing that's kind of bad to fracture is the cast speed, and that's because when you're crafting one of these, one of the cheapest ways to do it is to, like, for example, for this one where it's fractured all elemental resistances, you pretty much use a strength or int essence until you hit the other, and then you make sure that a prefix and a suffix is open. So you'll have to annul it down to that point and then do a suffix lock Reforged Caster. And Reforged Caster guarantees cast speed, and cast speed has 3 tiers, so it's pretty much a 1 in 3 to hit a T1 cast speed. So yeah, that's what I would suggest for crafting one of these. Of course, you can always just craft for 3 mod helicals. Like let's say you just want all elemental resistances, strength, and int. You can ditch the cast speed. I wouldn't, because the cast speed is very nice for making the build feel good. So if you really have to, then I would suggest just dropping the strength or getting more elemental resistances on your large clusters so you can ditch the elemental res on your helical to get cast speed on there. Now, the large clusters, so for these, I suggest getting one with all attributes in the suffixes. So you would get 35% int and all attributes. The increased damage doesn't really matter. I'm just using it because it was pretty cheap to buy one of these and it's not a dead stat for my build. Later on, you want to get like energy shield if you want to min-max it further. So you would need one with 35% int and all attributes. Make sure it's T1. And then you need one with 35% int and all elemental resistances, and that's to cap your resistances. And then for the last one, you can get increased effect, int, and cast speed. Cast speed is one of the strongest vectors to scale this build, so getting more of these is nicer. So for these clusters, you can get a 12 passive, 12% increased lightning damage, fracture a 35% increased effect on it, and craft them yourself. But what I opted to do when I grabbed these is, so let's say you want a 35% increased effect, intelligence, and all attributes, and we need a 12 passive. So what I opted to do is search for something like this. Let's say we want one without a notable and a random prefix. So let's say this one. This one is 12 divs right now. Okay, these went up a lot. But when I bought these, they were like 2-3 divs because it was on a pretty bad base. And if you can find one for cheap, like 4 or 5 divs, then I would suggest, like, let's say this was minion damage and it was selling for 2 divs. Then you would grab that and then use one of these refracting fogs here to re-roll the enchantment on the cluster jewel. So back when I was doing this, it was way cheaper to buy, let's say, 20 of these to get either spell damage, elemental damage, or lightning damage on the enchantment with the exact stats I wanted. So that would cost me around 10 to 15 divs to reroll it to that point from the bad gem, and it would be worth around like 35, 50 divs. I don't know if that would be worth still, and that's something you would have to figure out the math for yourself. But yeah, if you can do that, do that. If you can't, then you would find the fracture, and the way you would craft this is you can either alt-aug, regal, exalt until you get the 2 mods you want, or you can do chaos spamming, since at this point of the league, chaos is like 200, 300 to a div. So spending 300 divs per divine to roll your cluster jewels is not really that much of a loss. But yeah, for your split personalities, the strength int ones are fairly expensive since strength int stack is a pretty popular archetype even without the Jiquani build. If you can't afford 2 of these, then I would suggest getting an int energy shield to get some more survivability, and those are fairly cheap. What else is there? I think that's about it. But yeah, this is about it for the budget setup. You're pretty much just grabbing like Iron Will. Since we're stacking strength, we get like 20% more damage from this. We're getting pain attunement since we're low life, reserving life. We're getting instant leech since we hit so much. It's a lot of instant leech. And we also use grace with this evasion energy shield mastery for 1% increased evasion rating per 10 intelligence. They did recently nerf this patch, but it's still very strong since this one node alone gets us almost double our evasion rating, and that solves a lot of the physical defense pain points of the build. For the skills, we are, of course, using greater spell echo and crit damage. When you can't afford greater spell echo, regular spell echo is fine. It is still a very strong gem, even without the greater gem version. Right now, I have precision disabled on this config, since the precision isn't really doing anything for this build, since we are already overcapped. If you notice you aren't overcapped, then you can start using precision and reserve however much life you feel comfortable reserving. For Frostblink of Wintry Blast, this is fine linked with faster casting, but Spell Echo I think makes it, well, personally I think it makes it feel smoother, but it also does make it less controllable, since you will like, as you saw there, you will get kind of stuck in places, you'll get rubber banded and all that. But yeah, these 3 links makes it feel very smooth. For your animated guardian and specters, you're pretty much just trying to let them survive as much as you can. So you're using empower to increase their level, which in turn increases their maximum life. You're using elemental army to cap their resistances. You're getting more minion life. You're getting less damage taken for the minions. So yeah, for your animated guardian, the items you want to be using is the what is that item? The Kingmaker. And the Kingmaker is a very strong item since it gives you 10 fortification, 50% crit multi, culling strike, and increased item rarity. For that reason, it is very strong. I'm also using Leercast for 50% increased damage, as well as a Gruth Coals to keep him alive. All of those in total cost around like 15, 20 divines. So it's not really free, but it's also a very strong buff for what you pay for. For the gloves and boots, I'm using just regular resistance. Animated Guarding comes with 40% increased elemental, or 40% elemental resistance and 20% chaos resistance, as well as a metric fuck ton of base life. So this means life rolls on the gear don't really matter other than percent max life. And you're getting as much percent max life as you want from Gruth Coals, so that doesn't really matter, as well as regen. So on the gloves and boots, all you really want is life regeneration rate, chaos res, enough to cap chaos res, which is like 59%, something like that. Enough elemental res to cap, which is honestly not that much if you're once you're using the elemental army support, since you get 40 plus 29, that's 69. So you only need like 6% each, plus whatever much you need for the max res to cap the elemental resistances. And then other than that, on the glove implicit, you can also go for unnerve on hit. It's not going to proc very often, but it is more damage that you can't otherwise fit in anywhere else. So that's the animated guardian gear. For your specters, I'm opting to use the perfect spirit of fortune. So perfect spirit of fortune is pretty biz for this, since he gives you wrath as well as lucky lightning damage. Lucky lightning is very hard to acquire otherwise, and it's a very big DPS increase for something like lightning damage from Jiquani's potential, due to the fact that there's a very large range of damage that you gain from this. So if you see the PoB calcs here, I'm getting anywhere from 200 to 10,000 lightning damage. So every time I hit something, it will roll between those two, which means it can roll as low as 200 damage, which is very bad. So getting to roll that number twice and pick the higher number is a pretty significant damage increase. As you can see, if I delete this, your damage with hits is lucky value here, that's about a 50% damage loss. So yeah, this is a very strong Spectre. You should always use it. Your second Spectre slot is more, I guess, like personal preference. Right now, I'm using the Perfect Judgmental Spirit. And what Perfect Judgmental Spirit does is it casts Discipline. And this is a very strong discipline. I have the Spectre Aura simulated here, but pretty much the Perfect Spirit of Fortune is about a level 9 Wrath, and Discipline is about a level 25 Discipline. So this guy gives you like 250 additional energy shield, which is very massive. If you don't want to get Discipline and you just want more damage, then one other option you can do is the Perfect Forest Tiger. And what the Perfect Forest Tiger does is it grants you haste and frenzy charge on hit. Well, on hit for the Spectre, not for you. But haste is pretty nice. You get to move faster, you get to cast faster. It's a lot of damage, it's a lot of move speed. So if you prefer that, then you can use it. You can also opt for Perfect Pain Artist and then drop the Zealotry on Eternal Blessing. So what this guy does is he gives you 30% crit multi and Zealotry. And currently we're using Zealotry on Eternal Blessing so that we don't have to reserve any of our life or our mana to use this. And Eternal Blessing only disables aura skills that you reserve on mana, so we can use our other aura skills just fine since we're reserving life. So if you want to use Zealotry here and then maybe put Grace into the Eternal Blessing to get a little bit more aura effect on it, and then maybe use like Discipline yourself, then that is also a pretty viable option. But there's probably a few other Spectres that you can use, but these two I feel are the best that you can do, since the Discipline actually does give you a ton of energy shield due to the fact that we are using Influence boots at this point and Influence gloves, so we don't really have that much access to flat energy shield, and we are using the Gull instead of something like a Lich's Circlet with like 500 energy shield, so that's another big loss. So yeah, for the other gems, as I explained earlier, we're using Eternal Blessing on Zealotry to get a free aura for this. We're using Automation Convocation mainly to keep our Spectres on us, but also because our totem really hates to move, the Perfect Spirit of Fortune, so this helps a lot with that. For our auras, we're using Grace, Vitality. Yeah, Grace, basically this is our only source of flat evasion since we are using energy shield gear, and that's important since we can't scale anything with our evasion ES mastery if we don't have any flat evasion. If you have a mage blood, you can use like a jade flask to get 3000 evasion, but we don't have that option, so I opted to use Grace. We're using Vitality to get some regen that we can convert to energy shield. I should have been speccing this. This lets us get 800 regen along with our consecrated ground. For our other links, we're using more duration with Immortal Call cast when damage taken. This is pretty strong because Immortal Call usually has a too low of a duration for it to be decent, and it only really gets usable if you can sustain max endurance charges a lot. But since we are a spark build, we are getting a lot of duration already, increased duration from the tree. I say a lot, but it's really only just this wheel. But that wheel plus the more duration support gets Immortal Call up to 2.17 seconds of duration. And since our cooldown is 2.4 seconds, that means it's only really down for a duration of 0.23 seconds. So this becomes a very reliable source of massive damage reduction. But yeah, I also have our Spectre auras listed here. But yeah, that's about it for the budget version. For the current version I'm playing right now that I showcased, I've made a few upgrades from that point. So I've opted to get Life Leech and Arcane Surge on the Watcher's Eye. And this lets me shift the links around as such to get Arcane Surge support and Pierce on the Imbued. And we need Pierce on the Spark Imbued due to the fact that we swapped to a Simplex Amulet with attributes, intelligence, and increased damage per intelligence. This is very strong because the 2% increased damage per 15 intelligence is actually giving us quite a bit of increased damage. So it would be this times 2. So 330% increased damage just for a prefix slot. For the boots, at this point, I opted to fracture the 60% avoid being shocked and then craft with a rage essence to hit intelligence, and then do the prefixes to get flat T1 ES, flat percent ES, and failed movement speed. I really wanted to hit onslaught here, but I managed to hit the T1 flat ES on here while I was trying to annul, so I just kept this since it's going to take a metric fuck ton of currency to try to hit onslaught here. But yeah, for the implicit, you just go for the 40% shock, so you can add those up to 100% avoid shock. And the only really decent eater implicit you can get here is cooldown recovery rate for your immortal call. For the gloves, I didn't really make a change here because the next sizable upgrade here is going to be very expensive, and I don't really want to spend that currency at the moment because I'm saving up so I can do a swap to the more cast speed variation, which means I need to recraft one of my helicals with Shaper so I can activate the Bound by Destiny's flat crit so I can crit cap without having to use base crit on the gloves. But yeah, from the budget version, it really is just min-maxing on the large clusters mainly, just getting better large clusters, getting better jewels, Emperor's Wit, Emperor's Mastery. After you craft these boots, you can throw away your Abyss Jewel since you're already shock avoid cap and opt for something like a rare synthesis jewel like this. I'm currently in the process of recrafting this because I want triple crit multi with energy shield, and that's gonna take a lot of currency to craft since it is a synth jewel and not a fracture jewel. Yeah, that's about it for the current version of the build I'm rocking. I do have an aspirational PoB setup where you can reach around 700, 800 million DPS, as well as have like 17k energy shield, but that requires an Excel impenetrable shrine belt, which I can't afford for a long while, but it is something to look forward to take this build to bigger heights. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah, I'm gonna be streaming on Twitch kind of sometimes, kind of not, on Gin of the Lilies. So if you have any questions, you can come ask me there whenever I'm live. I'm just gonna be farming ritual for like the rest of the week. It's the only strat that doesn't make me want to kill myself, so yeah. Okay, some things I forgot to mention. Since we don't have spell suppress or that much spell block, we get 25% spell block from Jiquani's potential here on the implicit. But since we don't have that much spell defense, and we don't really have that much max res, or we don't have any max res at all, our elemental defenses are quite weak outside of the Immortal Call and the implicit on the Twilight Regalia for less damage taken and the fortification. So we get like something like 30 or 20 to 50% less damage taken. But if you know how strong spell suppress is, then that's not really that much compared to what you can get from 100% spell suppress or 75% spell block. So you will be pretty weak to elemental damage. So this isn't really a giga tanky build. You'll be fairly tanky for stuff like mapping. Like as you probably saw, I got to level 98 just fine from 97 just doing ritual, but it's not extremely tanky. You see this in the Uber Elder fight as well, where I get just completely shredded by the Shaper Balls. But yeah, these Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels will be fairly expensive if this video does get a lot of views. So the Uber versions of the jewels are Uber only drops, and they're fairly rare. So they're weighted on top of that. So even if like 5-10 people decide to roll the build, these will become very scarce and expensive. So that's one of the big caveats of this build, is that it's kind of locked around this. So if you can't get your hands on a Searing Purity, you're pretty much forced into a life-based Blunderbore setup. If you still want to use the acceleration belt. If you don't care about the acceleration belt, you can go Mage Blood and use the usual coruscating elixir. But if you don't want to do either, then what you're kind of forced into doing is pretty much getting life on the prefix of these large clusters, so you can get decent amount of life there. And if you can get a Screams of the Desiccated with acceleration massive shrine, then all power to you, but you pretty much go like that. So you can be a hybrid life energy shield setup, and you can get around like 4,500 5,000 life with that, which is fairly decent. And then you either have two choices for your auras, so you can use just enough auras to reach half of your life and then use petrified blood so you get decent max hit on your life, despite having half your life reserved. Or the other option you can do is just not reserve your life at all. So you would lose like grace. Actually, you would probably just drop zealotry and then use grace in the eternal blessing slot, and then move your zealotry to a specter. Or vice versa. If you can get the grace one, then you can use zealotry yourself, etc., etc. But basically, you would just not use any auras, so you can have as much of your life as possible available. And that would mean that you would have to drop pain attunement, which is pretty good since it's generic 30% more spell damage. But we don't really need more damage on this build, let's be honest here. So if you can't afford the Searing Purity, then that's one option you have for you. But yeah, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed the build. Insta phase. Holy, my damage. Yep, that's about what I expected. Oh, you're so squished before the resistance shrine. Just gonna have to keep moving. So glad you don't lose EXP in these anymore, though. All they're doing is slam. Scary. Ah, I walked in those. The Elder action speed slow doesn't even feel that bad when you have this much. That's not too bad.
You follow in my footsteps, in my father's footsteps. That alone should give you pause.
Definitely feel like getting the inspired learning should make these like a lot better. Mostly just because one of the monster mods is extra projectiles, and you kind of need that when you're doing wide open strats like this. Plus, I think you get a mod where you can't get stunned, and that's really good too for this build. Also need a source of explode, honestly. It just makes the clear way better for wide open areas. But yeah, this build isn't really made for breach right now. Made for AFK ritual farming. Holy, these volatiles. And you don't have any suppress, it hurts like... That wasn't that bad. I didn't die at least. Holy volatiles, get away from me. Oh, that's fucked up.